Good Tuesday morning of the 27th week of the year in ordinary time. This is, again, a famous, these are great texts. Luke is I told you that yesterday, he's a great writer. He's a good storyteller, he's a good writer. Well, he was also doggone well-educated. He was a very well-educated man. He was a doctor. I don't know if he did house calls. I'll have to check sometime. Anyway, this is another very famous one. Jesus entered a village where a woman whose name was Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary, who sat beside the Lord at his feet, listening to him speak. Martha, burdened with much serving, came to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me by myself to do the serving? Tell her to help me." The Lord said to her in reply, "Martha, Martha, you're anxious and worried about many things. There's need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her." That's neat, isn't it? That's a great story. See, you almost have, let me show you this. I'll give you something. They don't tell you this stuff in catechism class, but I'm going to share it with you, okay? This is monastery. This is monastic. This is very much the Marthas and the Marys, and we use that language. Mary are the contemplatives. Martha are the guys that get things done. And sometimes there's a bite in that story, okay? And in some ways, it's hard to explain it, but the contemplative monks, okay? I would put myself there, okay? We lived in silence. The most important thing in our day was our 2 hours of prayer, mental prayer, worship, contemplative life. Our work was to pray. The brothers were the cooks, the habit makers, tailors. They did all the physical labor. And in many ways, the missionaries, the preachers, the guys going out and giving missions were really busting their butt. The ministers, they were the Marthas too. But then you had to get guys that were just the contemplatives. And in most of the time, it was completely understood. But I remember the Marthas and the Marys. You'd see the Marys, I'm one of them, you'd see them they loved the silence of the monastery, the quiet, the contemplative life. You'd see them walking in the garden by themselves, not lazy. They're in the reflective mode. Some ways I miss that very much, to tell you the truth. The silence of the house, the silence. In the choir, in the chapel, even during Mass. This was before Vatican II. We didn't even respond. You said an hour. You sat in silence for an hour while the Mass was being said, when it was being celebrated. The monastic silence. I told you what my Uncle Harry said. He came to visit me in Hartford one time. That was pre-Vatican II. And he was struck by how silent the monastery was. There's 100 guys living there. How silent it was. That's the Mary. The Martha part is the guys out there busting their butt preaching missions, or the brothers cooking for 150 guys, 120 guys. The guys working the lawns, cutting the lawns. Yeah, that's the truth. The Marthas and the Marys. And it's interesting, too, because they were both powerfully loved and respected aspects of the Passionist way of life. It truly was. Some of our greatest men were the men who lived in silence, who are men of profound prayer, of silent prayer. Yes, that's the truth. And yet we loved our missionaries who were going out and preaching missions in the parishes and all the rest. They're great preachers. The Passionists were really famous preachers. They'd go out half the year. They'd be out at various parishes for the parish renewals, the missions. You probably saw them and heard them. See? And back home, there were many a man, and not just the brothers, but it could be the priests who, for whatever reasons, did not have an active ministry, but were actively prayerful in the silence of the monastery. And I have to say, they were every bit as respected and loved and admired and imitated as any great preacher. We were different calls in the same community. So you had your Marthas and your Marys, and you got to know they used the exact language, the Marthas and the Marys. They would say that. Well, these guys are the Marys. they're the Marthas. The guys that were working in the parish. They're the Marthas. They're out busting their butt. They're working hard. See, but they were not saying that the Marys had something wrong when they chose their greater part. It's the contemplative life. If I wanted to give you the early church, okay, and I don't know when Luke wrote this or not, but in the church you have the contemplative orders and you have the active ministry, the diocesan clergy, but also the active ministries, such as the Jesuits and Dominicans, etc. But you also have the Trappists, the Carthusians, who spend their entire life in silence. See? The silence of prayer. The image, the church has both Marthas and Marys. One's not more important than the other. They serve the church by what they were called to. Even for myself, I felt very much called to the silence of the monastery. And its austerity and its beauty all in one. I love the silence. That's the truth for a gadabout gaddy like me. I love the silence. I still do. That's why it's not hard for me to live by myself. I've been living alone like this for 24 years. It doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I love it. I love being quiet. I love the reflective life. You see? I love being quiet. See? You wouldn't think that if somebody like myself was gregarious by nature. Yeah, I can go in the classroom and yak out, for 2 hours, whatever, for the 2 classes I have. Yeah, when I come home to Lily, my dog. She's snoring right now. I don't know if you can hear her or not. God, she snores. But really, to the quiet of the house, the quiet. And it's interesting because in some ways, even in the church, in the monasteries, you're surrounded by art. Magnificent art and beauty. The monasteries are beautiful, beautiful places. The land is beautiful, so are the buildings. In their simplicity, they're overwhelmingly beautiful. A monk's room is clean as a whistle, and it is, while austere, it's still beautiful. Okay? Yes, that's the truth. The austerity, in some ways, highlights the beauty. That is, you're not overwhelmed by action and complexities, but rather by the simplicity of the good and the true and the beautiful. That's the prayer life. But also one recognizes it, even in the land and in the monastery, even in the middle of the inner cities, or have beautiful gardens. They're beautiful places to walk, and you always walk in silence. I told you that before. Always walk in silence. Or if in a companionship is one other person. It's not loud, a lot of yakking and horsing around. It's none of that. It's a prayerful walk amidst the beauty of the garden. That's the truth. You have to see it. I told you that story. I told you that my friend Sarah, when she lived in New York, and I was back in the monastery for a meeting, and Sarah came to meet me at the Jamaica monastery, and we went in the backyard. We went in the monastery yard. There was a couple of guys walking, one by himself and 2 guys walking together. And I said, Sarah, see that? That's monasticism. See the one guy walking by himself? That's a prayerful walk. And the other 2, they're chatting, Sarah. They're friends walking together in almost a prayerful conversation. There's something beautifully beautiful about that. That's monasticism. Think of the famous Thomas Merton. Yes. He was, of course, a Trappist. But I think monasteries are almost all the same in that regard. There's a reverence for the silence of the heart, the Mary part, you see? And yet, the Mary part becomes the Martha also. Yes, I don't know how else to put it. When you'd hear a homily from one of those fellows that were extremely reflective and mystical, in their orientation. I think of my confessor, Silver Rouse. My God, when they would give a homily, you were in the presence of the holy and of a real profound wisdom because it was flowing out of their intimate relationship to Christ. You have to know it. I think of Sylvan. Yeah, he was my confessor for many years. Man of profound faith and intelligence, brilliant mind, but a man of profound silent prayer. And when he gave a homily, or when he shared a thought with you, you were in the presence of the brilliant, the wise, and the holy. And you knew it. That's the truth.